Hey everybody, Matt McQueenie, Mix Minus Podcast, Saturday, February 3rd, the year 2018. We are 1 month into this year already. How the heck is this happening? Tomorrow is also Super Bowl Sunday, the Super Bowl of the year 2017, even though it happens in 2018. It is also the 10-year anniversary of the New York Giants defeating the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. They went ahead and did the same 4 years later as well, but it was 10 years ago, I believe, to today as opposed to tomorrow, where the Giants shocked the world. They played an absolutely tremendous game. They are the only team to beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl in this run, where the Patriots will now be going to their 8th Super Bowl. They'll be going for their 6th win tomorrow against the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's going to be an interesting one. It really will be. Because I think as a Giants fan, you almost don't want somebody else to beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, even though it's like kind of a stupid distinction, because plenty of teams have beaten the Patriots in the AFC playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl. I mean, 8 Super Bowls is unbelievable, though. It really is. I mean, their string of dominance is like the Yankees of the late 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, or the Spurs run. I mean, they're there every single year. And to be in this many Super Bowls in this time of parity is just unreal. And so I think we're looking tomorrow at this Super Bowl and thinking what could have been. And what could have been is Carson Wentz, the young wonderkind quarterback of the Eagles, manning under center. Funny I use the word manning as the quarterback who's beaten those Patriots in those 2 Super Bowls, but Wentz had the MVP streak right on point in this season. He was really set to win that MVP and went down in, I forget what the week was, but what was it, like 3/4 of the way through the season, 2/3 in LA, went diving in for a touchdown and his knee just wiggled around. And I think he tore many of the ligaments, tendons in his knee, and he was out for the season. And old Eagles stalwart Nick Foles came in and was sort of uneven, had his moments, but also had his down moments, and didn't even quite set himself apart when they got into the playoffs. They had a real squeaker. What was it, 15-10 when they beat Atlanta, both games at home. Obviously, when you have the home field advantage, going 13-3. And then they just absolutely destroyed the Vikings. But you sit there and wonder, is it because Philly had that home field advantage, which can be really a complete thing to have? I mean, that home field in the playoffs, it can make a team feel like they're on a magic carpet. And we saw it with the Vikings, because you thought the Vikings were going to come into Philadelphia and truly win that game. You really didn't think that the Eagles had a shot. I mean, maybe Eagles fans did. But the fact they have Nick Foles, who's this backup quarterback, who had something like, what was it, 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions that one season, that one magical season, then sort of, I think, got injured or fell off, and then was in the Sam Bradford trade to the Rams, and he kind of lost his mojo. Nick Foles, that is, when he went to the Rams, lost that starting job, and then went and backed up Alex Smith, who's now a Washington Redskin, but he went and backed him up in Kansas City, and then came over to the Eagles, I believe this year, came back to the place where he had his real moments of distinction, and he was there to back up at 29 years old the quarterback in Carson Wentz, who you thought was indestructible, who you thought was going to really ascend his way up in the NFL. You didn't think they were going to ascend this quickly this year, but the Eagles really built quite a team. And so you're looking at this Super Bowl wondering, can the Eagles do what the Giants did, which is to put immense pressure on Tom Brady, and it's a kind of pressure that you can put on him without actually having to call blitzes. So it's an actual pressure that is just generated from the front four on the line getting to the quarterback without a blitz. So everyone can stay at home covering who they need to cover, and that defense can just push the line and get to the quarterback quicker than he's comfortable and quicker than he's able to get the ball out. Tom Brady can attack blitzes, and he'll find receivers. He'll pick players off, quick hitters, and that's what the Giants were able to do. They were able to get to him without having to necessarily blitz. I was listening to a podcast, Pro Football Focus, great podcast, and I think they were kind of saying that the Giants might have had 20 or 25% of all the calls in the Super Bowl, or both Super Bowls maybe, that were actually called blitzes. So 3/4 of the time, they were just playing straight up and getting to the quarterback, putting the pressure on, making him feel uncomfortable because he still is a 40-year-old man. And anybody who's watching this Tom versus Time documentary, which I am enthralled by, I'm into it. I really like it. 15-minute quick hitters on Facebook, nice little documentary, get into the life of this really untouchable player. You see what he puts in. You see how much training he puts forward, how many shakes he drinks, how many just meals many of us would not think of eating that he eats, how much video he watches, how much film he goes through. At the age of 40, he still has it, and it is for that I still believe that the Patriots are going to have this win. I think they're going to take this one. But there's always the feeling of uncertainty when you go into a Super Bowl. The two teams are left at the end of the day. You have that any given Sunday sentiment, and you just don't know sometimes. Sometimes magic can happen. And I would tell you, if Carson Wentz were there, I think this would be different, because I think Carson Wentz could go at this defense and do what needed to be done to win. I know he'd be very young being in a Super Bowl, but he really seemed to be a precocious player, ahead of his time in many ways. He seemed to be a very veteran-like presence in a young guy. He seemed to be ahead in his years. And Nick Foles is there as the ultimate wild card now. A guy who struggled, as I said, had his downs, but had his ups, and really had one of the better quarterback games that you can imagine in a conference championship game. I mean, he had the element of surprise there against the Vikings. He showed what he has, and maybe showing that is the worst thing that can happen, because now Bill Belichick has that on film to watch and has that to tabulate against and to build a defense for both Nick Foles. But who will it be? Great players emerge, and it will be something that's probably going to be decided in the fourth quarter. But we'll see. I wanted to kind of go through the season a little bit. I was hoping to have Tim Castano on here, but Tim has some family difficulties right now. Family member in the hospital, potentially at the end here, very close member, and he's really kind of out of the loop. But I was hoping to go through our picks this year, because we do a over-unders wins picks podcast at the start of the year, which is a lot of fun. It's so much fun going into the football season, the promise of a season ahead, and to kind of prognosticate where you think things are going to go. And I actually ended up 15-15-2 after all that work, all that preparation you put in, all that research, and I pretty much ended up 500. The reason I have 2 there is because I'm counting here if a team lands on the wins that the betting site says they should get. So if a betting site says the over-under is 9 wins and a team ends at 9, I'm going to give that as the tie. It's kind of a push. So there were 2 teams that did that. One was the where was it here? Was it Baltimore? Baltimore did it. And who was our other friend who did it here? I got my 2 here. What am I missing here? Was it right off the bat? Arizona. Arizona did it. Yeah, right off the bat. So I'll just kind of go through some of the picks. So I went 15-15-2. Not bad. I was a little over 500 last year, and now I'm right on the dot. And I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about it. There were a lot of things that happened in the season that hurt my picks, and that's the difficulty in prognosticating something that has 16 frames, something that has 16 chances in a year to go wrong, or for injuries to happen, obviously, or for a team to play way beyond what anyone could have thought. And that's why we watch sports, because I can't pick these games at the start of a season. I would be a millionaire if I could pick the games, if I could pick the amount of wins these teams were going to get. And that's why we watch this. It's because it's unexpected. And so there are teams who are going to play way above, like the Eagles going 13-3, or way below, like the Giants going 3-13. So that's why we watch. But 15-15-2, I don't know how to feel about it. But I had Arizona. I had them going over 10-6. They were an 8. 8 was their number, and they ended up at 8-8. Carson Palmer went down. He ended up retiring. They had a little bit of an infusion from Adrian Peterson at some point, but then he petered out. So they were sort of a team that was in transition in a way. Bruce Arians is out as head coach. They have this guy, Steve Wilkes, I believe, who's come in there now. So they were right on their number at 8-8. There's something very unsatisfying about that, I think, when you're a team, especially who had higher aspirations. Atlanta was a 9.5 over-under, and I had them going 11-5. They ended up going 10-6, so my over was correct. My win total that I prognosticated was not right, but I did have the over, so they did get there. Very uneven through the year. They found a way to 10 wins, which is the mark of a really good team, but you really thought they could have had more. They beat Los Angeles, the Rams, getting to the playoffs in their second year in Los Angeles under Sean McVay. They went 11-5. They were a really good team this year to watch, and they're going to be on the ascent for many years to come potentially. But the Atlanta, with their veteran play, was able to kind of knock them off early in that first round. Then they went into Philadelphia and really kind of did not distinguish themselves very well. Baltimore was a team that surely did not do what they needed to do. They were an over-under of 9, and they actually ended up going 9-7, but it's really a travesty they did not win the final game of the year to get into the playoffs because they had that just crazy kind of Hail Mary-ish play from Andy Dalton, Cincinnati Bengals, taking that one home and knocking them out of the playoffs. So that was a really bad-tasting 9-7, which kind of set the stage for the Buffalo Bills, who are next up in our alphabetical order field here. They were a 6-win over-under, and a lot of people kind of thought they were not going to be very good. They traded away players. They kind of looked like they were setting up for next year and for next year's draft. I believe they have a ton of draft picks in different trades, and it seems like no matter how much they traded, they still just were the kind of team that wouldn't die, and they were able to get themselves to the playoffs for the first time in something like 20 years. So they ended up at 9-7. I really felt good about the Bills, and I'm talking feeling good about them in the sense of a 6-win over-under, right? Not a 10-win, but I felt really good about that, and I didn't go with my gut. I really felt they would either, I wrote in my notes that it was very hard to not have them at 6 wins, but I didn't want to push, so I had them just under at 5-11, so I did feel good about them. I feel like having Shady McCoy there, and just enough weapons and a real defense, a real competitive spirit would have them right there. They ended up really jumping over that, being 9-7, making the playoffs, having a not pretty looking playoff game against Jacksonville that went down to the wire, but it was down to the wire with very low scoring. They lost that game. Next up with the Carolina Panthers, 8.5 over-under. I had them over, and I said 9-7 conservative. They did go well over at 11-5. They really kind of reasserted themselves. That was a great division, that NFC South. Thinking of the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers, and the New Orleans Saints, all teams who really did well, and kind of at the expense of the Tampa Bay Bucks, who were expected to do much better and did not do really well at all there. Chicago was next up. A lot of people were expecting them to have a transition year, to get the new quarterback in there, Trubisky. They had Glennon kind of start the way. They were kind of competitive at home at times, and their over-under was 5.5. I did have them under at 4-12. They ended up at 5-11, so because of that half game there, I was able to win on that under bet. You're not really sure where they're going in future years. They got a lot of work to do because they were really competitive again in games to get to 5-11, and you're not quite sure if the quarterback is going to do what needs to be done to ascend, but you never know. Look at Carson Wentz. Cincinnati, as I said, had that real just pull it out of their butt win against Baltimore in the final game of the season to allow Buffalo to get in. They were an 8.5 over-under. I did have them under at 8-8. That was my thought, but they did go 7-9, so I won that one. The Browns really disappointed me. They were a 4.5 over-under. They didn't win a game this year. I thought for sure Myles Garrett, the guy from, what was that guy from Michigan? Oh man, the Michigan safety, Jabril Peppers. I thought they just had the pieces to just get themselves into the mix, and I wanted to root for them to be over, and I felt they would be 4-12, which would be under, but I just felt they had some juice, and I thought they would do enough, and they were in some games, and they did have some nice sort of comebacks to be close, to backdoor at least the cover on some point spreads, but they did go 0-16, so there's a lot of work to do. What did they have? One win the year before, so that's not going to really get you very far. The Cowboys were a 9.5 over-under. I felt very strongly about them being under. I actually had them going 8-8, and that was after they went 13-3 last year, I believe. I just didn't feel good about it. I think we sort of knew that. I think we sort of knew that the team was going to regress a little bit. Dak Prescott was in his second year as a quarterback after he sort of had a charmed life last year. Ezekiel Elliott was very good, but there was kind of the sense that he was probably going to miss at least 4 games, and he did end up losing 6 games because of off-the-field troubles. And they had a tougher schedule, coming out of being a really good team last year. I did not feel good about them on the over. I felt really good on them getting to 8-8. They ended up at 9-7, which was an under. So I'm not even sure that I would say that it was a disappointment necessarily when you really look at all of the factors at play, but they did go under. Denver, 8.5 over under, and you look at what happened there, they have to get a quarterback in there. I have at times felt okay about Trevor Siemian, and he does enough to kind of whet your appetite to make you feel good about his tools, but then he just has a way of going bad for a handful of games, and they're wasting the years of that great defense. And when the offense falls apart, the defense just kind of goes, what's the point? It was like that in those early days with the New York Giants, with that defense, with the Michael Strahan defense, and they would have troubles with the quarterback, and the defense kind of loses their will, in the pre-Eli Manning phase. A defense can lose its will, and then all of the kind of positive aspects of that unit go bad when they don't think they have the offense to match the defense. The Lions were an 8 win over-under. They ended up over. I thought they were going to go under, so they did over-deliver, but the way they started out, they really did end up under-delivering to get to 9-7. So that's, that is what it is. Detroit just kind of has they feel like in a little bit like the Washington Redskins with Kirk Cousins, where the roster is good and certain players are really good, but nothing really distinguishes itself. It's kind of how I feel about the Tennessee Titans. Like nobody is like a household name in a way. I mean, the quarterbacks are. And so that kind of defines these teams. And you look at having a great quarterback, what that means, you can get to 9 or 10 wins sometimes with a really kind of subpar roster, whereas you have a great defense, you have great players except the quarterback, as we talk about with a team like Denver, or you think about some other teams maybe like Arizona, who have all the pieces around it, and they just can't. Like you look at Houston, for instance. Houston was able to get Deshaun Watson in there, and they looked like a world beater. The minute he's out, no matter how great your defense is, no matter how much money you have in it, no matter how many pass rushers you have extraordinaire on there, it doesn't matter. You just got to have balance, and really the balance has to really lend itself more to the offensive end and to the quarterback. A quarterback can just control things. I mean, look at Indianapolis. Look at Green Bay, the next up team. They were a 10-win over-under. I had them going 11-5 on the over. Obviously, with the loss of Aaron Rodgers for much of the season, he did try to come back to save their season, ended up losing that game, but they ended up at 7-9. So that's one of those games where I feel like was a toss-up for me in picking, where if you have Aaron Rodgers in there the whole year, I definitely think the over happens. Houston, another team, 8.5 over under. I had them going 9-7, and that was without understanding or without the kind of idea that Deshaun Watson was going to do what he did. Because if he was going to be there the whole year, would he tear his ACL, I believe? If he was going to be there the whole year, that team could have gotten 10 or 11. he was inspirational on that field. The things he did, he was commanding the field. And if you can mix what he's doing and he can come back, his knee can be strong, mixing that with what that defense can do, that is going to be a scary team. Indianapolis, the Colts. A lot of talk is that the offensive coordinator from the Patriots, what's his name? Josh McDaniels. I'm like it's late at night, guys, so I'm having a hard time with my recollection. Had a couple of pops earlier tonight at the restaurant on the early bird dinner. Josh McDaniels, talk as he'll go there. Let's see if he can reassert his career as a head coach with a quarterback in Andrew Luck, if he can even come back. But they were a 9-win over-under. It shows you how powerful a great quarterback being in the saddle is for your team, because that team went 4-12. That is what the talent of that team was, because they had Jacoby Brissett, who they were able to trade for from the Patriots. Isn't it amazing, the Patriots, that they had 3 starting NFL quarterbacks on their roster when you think of Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett? All of those guys were starting for NFL teams for the majority of seasons once they were put in place to start this year. Obviously, Brady always is. Brissett was sort of brought into duty because there wasn't another choice, and he did do pretty well in moments. And Garoppolo obviously did what he did. He won like the last 5 games, I believe, in a row. I mean, he was a world beater. He actually destroyed my over-under there because you never could have prognosticated he was going to show up in San Francisco. But Indianapolis is built on Andrew Luck and the way he's able to control the game. He controls it in all facets, just being on the offensive end. And they went 4-12. I had them going under at 7-9. But that's what he's able to do. He could get them to 9 or 10 wins just on his own. Jacksonville was a 6.5 over-under. I had them on the over. I saw them going 9-7, and I even said potentially 10-6. They ended up at 10-6, and I felt crazy saying it. It's one of those picks where you just have a gut feeling that they have it. They have the ability to do what needs to be done. And when you look at the schedule, you can just count up the wins, and you go, no, I think it's going to happen here and here and here. And I did not see how they wouldn't get to at least 9 wins. And so I felt like that 6.5 over-under was a tough one. They got all the way to the AFC Championship game. They were up 10 in the fourth quarter in New England, in Foxborough, in that AFC Championship game. And they're always going to be just short with their quarterback. Blake Bortles can do just enough. What he did in that first half, he had maybe 2 missed passes. He was 14 for 16, I believe, and he looked really good. But when it gets to that fourth quarter, just like when it gets to that fourth quarter in the other game, in the other leagues, like the NBA, that is when the wheat is separated from the chaff. That is when great players come to play. And I'm not saying he doesn't have the ability. It's hard to be on the road in Foxborough against a tactician like Bill Belichick, and the defenses he can put out there and the schemes and the things he can show you or fake you out with. But, you know, that was a Super Bowl team. If their quarterback was even just 10% better when he's playing his best, man, Kansas City, I had them over. They were 9-win over-under. They ended up at 10-6. It looked like they were going to do much more. Didn't they win like their first 6? They really took care of New England in that first game, and they looked like world beaters. And it looked like Alex Smith was really separating himself from his past, which was a very good quarterback. But it looked like he was doing some prolific things. And isn't it amazing, 1 year later, here he is. Now he's the quarterback of Washington. And he's probably going to end up having made $200 and $250 million, something like that, quietly. You think of him as like this underdog, and he's just going to do so well. But that wasn't over. The Chargers, 7.5 over under, and I had them going 8-8. They ended up 9-7. And they started off, was it 0-3 or 0-4? Forget which one it was. It might have been they were 0-3, and maybe the Giants were 0-3 at the same time when they came into the Meadowlands. And the Chargers, the Los Angeles Chargers, were able to get up off the mat in that game and really assert themselves down the stretch. They didn't quite get there, but they did go 9-7 in their first year in LA. Good on my over. The Rams, another LA team there, 5.5 over under. They ended up 11-5. I had them on the over, but that was an over at 6-10. I felt they had a tough schedule, but they really, really did well in the first season under Sean McVay. Made Jared Goff look good. All of a sudden they got all these weapons. Their defense was always good. That is a team that will be reckoned with Hopefully they don't lose confidence from losing that initial playoff home game. But I don't think so when you're young. I think Sean McVay will have him ready to go. He was the coach of the year, I believe. I think Todd Gurley was the AP offensive player of the year, and I think Aaron Donald was the defensive player of the year. So they're loaded. I mean, they're looking really good. Miami was a 7.5 over-under. I never felt good about them. I just don't feel good about Jay Cutler. I had them going over 8-8. I shouldn't have. I should have gone with my gut. They ended up 6-10, so I lost that one. The Vikings were an 8.5 over-under. I had them going 9-7. They ended up going 13-3. You know, the problem I had with the Vikings, I don't care how well Case Keenum did for you. I don't care what he did down the stretch to get that team in the position they did. I wanted to see the Vikings. And I was even thinking, what were they up 7-0, I think, in that game in Philly? I was thinking, boy, this Vikings team, the thing they need to do against New England when they get to that Super Bowl in their home stadium, you know, it's obviously being held in Minnesota this year. I was thinking to myself, they got to do what Nick Saban did in that championship game. A guy who's won as many championships as he has, college national championships. Is it 6 now, I think? Or is it 5? I forget. One of them. But what he did, he had a starting quarterback in his second year, a guy who had started since his first game. I think he came in to take over for a player in the first game. I think it was the USC game the year before. From that point forward, he started every game. And was it Tua Tagovailoa? Or I can't say his name right. But they had this really kind of quarterback, this almost Russell Westbrook type quarterback, this lefty, this undersized guy from Hawaii. And Jalen Hurts, their starting quarterback, played and distinguished himself, and maybe had 2 losses in 2 years. And then Nick Saban felt that the game was getting out of hand in that national championship game against Georgia. And he said, you know what? No sentimentality here. Tua, you're in there. The guy took the game over and won them a national championship. Won it. From nothing. From a place where they were going to have no shot. And a guy who was sentimental would leave that quarterback in and say, I got this guy for 2 more years. I have to be nice to him. I have to be faithful to him. I have to be loyal to him. And he said, no, I am loyal to winning. I want to win a national championship again. I don't care how many I've won. And he put Tua in, and the guy just took over. And now they're going to have a decision moving forward. Who do they start? We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Hurts comes back, because that's just how Saban is. He's going to go with the best quarterback. So maybe Tua came in relief, and that was what really helped him distinguish himself, because they weren't prepared for him. Who knows? But that's what I wanted Minnesota to do if they got to the Super Bowl. But I thought, if they don't get to the Super Bowl, they need to do everything they can to get there. It is so hard to get to this point in the NFL. The parity is what it is. Everything's so even. And when you get to this point, you have no excuses to not do everything, to not pull out your bag of tricks to get there. And I wanted Mike Zimmer to do, Pat Shurmur, our new New York Giants head coach, I wanted them to do what you need to do to win. And they got 3 starting quarterbacks. I talked about the Patriots having the 3 starting quarterbacks on their team. The Vikings had 3 starting quarterbacks. I wanted a package for every one of those quarterbacks. And I wanted Mike Zimmer to throw surprise at the field. I wanted him to just go, all right, Sam Bradford, you're in, run our package. You know, a lot of times they'll say, oh, the first 15 plays of the game are choreographed, right? You know exactly what you're going to run for the first 15. I wish they did that with all 3 quarterbacks. And they had like, if we roll you in, here's the first 5 plays you're going to do, or the first 10 plays. And you throw that surprise at the deck, because you got Case Keenum in there, who really did well and is going to find himself with a big contract this year. More power to him. Anybody who watched that All or Nothing show, anybody who watched Hard Knocks, is going to feel good for the guy. You're going to feel really good. What he was able to do, how he's been able to be resilient and to thrive and to survive in the NFL in an unrelenting game is just, your hat's off to him. But you got to win. You got to play to win. And Case Keenum, it didn't seem like he had it. The whole team didn't have it. They needed a spark. And I would have just had plays ready. I would have been like 6 minutes to go in the first. Sam Bradford, you're in. You got your 5 plays. And just throw them off. They haven't prepared for that, being Philadelphia. And I know they had Sam Bradford as their quarterback, right up until before the first season the year before. But Throw it out there. Have a handful of plays for Teddy Bridgewater. There is no tomorrow if you lose. And I wanted them to do that. And I just, it feels like there's no imagination to not have that ready to go. You just say, well, I'm going to go to the prom with the one who brung me, or whatever the saying is. And it just didn't feel right. Case Keenum is great. He did a great job. I mean, he's not great, but he did a great job this year. And he will get a contract with somewhere. He will get real money for the first time in his career this next year. But that wasn't for that game, and that wasn't for the Super Bowl. You play to win for your Minnesota Vikings team in that moment. And to leave two starting quarterbacks on the sidelines when you need a spark just was hard for me to comprehend. I don't know how that happened. But they were 13-3. They really over-delivered. And it was at that point where I was, if I'm following my numbers, I was 12-6-2 at that point. I have a good record if I could end there. But then we start falling. New England was a 12.5 over-under. They ended up just over that 13-3. I had them going under, but 11-5, which is still a great season. And it looked like my bet was going to pay off because early on they had their struggles. When you think of, weren't they 1-2 early on, I believe? But they did what they do. You can't bet against them. New Orleans was an 8 over-under, and I had them going 9-7. They ended up 11-5. So that was a real renaissance year for the Renaissance City. The Giants at 9 wins over-under. I had them going 9-7, but I wanted to go over because I root for them and I want to root for a great season. They ended up 11-5 the year before. They really overplayed themselves, and they really evened out the regression to the mean this year because they ended up 3-13. And if this 3-13 means a house cleaning happened, which will set them up for the future, Pat Shurmur could be the guy. We'll see. Who knows? The quarterback whisperer. Giants are in a position where they are probably going to draft someone like Sam Darnold. That to me is exciting. If you have to experience a drop-off year like this to move forward because, and to benefit from having a bad year, which means a good draft pick, I'll take it, I guess. I mean, who knows? Because then you look at the Jets. They were expected to go 3-13. That's where I actually had them. Their over-under was 4.5. And they ended up 5-11. They were just over, so that hurt me. They were too competitive for their own good. Oakland was a team, 10-win over-under. I saw them going right at that number, 10-6. I said over just because, I don't know. I thought they might do it. That's a high over-under, though. They ended up 6-10, so it was all moot. But they got a lot of work to do. They got John Gruden in there. It'll remain to be seen if that's the answer. It's hard to tell. It's going to be a moment for some water. This is where all falls apart. The Eagles, they were an 8-win over-under. I saw that number at the start of the year and I went, ooh, that doesn't make sense to me. And Vegas knows because they ended up way over. I had them going 6-10 under. They ended up 13-3, so that's one of those shocks. Pittsburgh was a 10.5 over under. I saw them going under, but at 10-6, so it was still a good year, still playoff year. They ended up 13-3, which was a bit of a surprise. They ended up losing to Jacksonville in that second round in the playoffs, home field in Pittsburgh. See where they end up there. San Francisco, I was looking good until they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. They were a 4.5 over-under. I had them going 3-13. They were well on their way to doing that until Jimmy G showed up, and they ended up at 6-10 somehow. Wow. Seattle, a 10.5 over-under is a high number. You wish it were 9.5 so you could kind of go with 10 and feel good. I still had them going over at 11-5. They ended up at 9-7. They had a lot of injuries on the defensive end this year. Their offensive line was still porous, and Russell Wilson is still an inspirational character who lifts up a team, but you can only do so much, and they fell off. Now, a team like that falling off to 9-7 is still pretty impressive. Like that's a really down year, but they did. Tampa Bay had an absolute down year, 8.5 over under. We watched them on Hard Knocks. We saw what they were going to do. Everything looked good. You felt even better about them watching Hard Knocks. And I had them going under still, though, because I looked at the schedule. But I wrote in my notes, I feel like they're better than this, though. They have a lot of weapons. They just looked right. They have Jameis Winston under center, and he played the part. He looked good. He reminded me of a mix when he was speaking between Charles Barkley and Muhammad Ali. And maybe he's not an NFL quarterback. It's hard to tell. He can play up, he can play down, and they ended up down. They were 5-11, just a really bad year. Tennessee felt like a 5-11 team who ended up they ended up 9-7 and did end up making the playoffs. I did have them going over, though. They were an 8.5. Marcus Mariota is a competitive son of a bitch. He really does enough to get you wins when the game is up for grabs. He'll do a stiff arm. He'll do a block. He does what needs to be done. It's not what you're looking for the quarterback to do. It's not the clutch play. He makes like Tim Tebow plays. They're like not the clutch plays you want your prototypical quarterback to do, but he does them and gets wins. So I did have them going over. And then the Redskins, over under 7.5. I thought they'd go 8-8, just over 7.5. They ended up going 7-9. They've parted ways with Kirk Cousins and brought in Alex Smith. It'll be interesting to see how Alex Smith does there. And then how Pat Mahomes steps in for him in Kansas City. But yeah, so after all that, I ended up 15-2. It's not overly fulfilling, but it was a year unlike any other. And I think that we're going to potentially see a pretty good Super Bowl. The one thing I did see, speaking of Super Bowl, is this Two Bills documentary. It's a big football episode. Two Bills documentary on ESPN, the 30 for 30. This thing was great. I loved it. The two Bills being Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells, the understudy in Belichick, the mentor in Parcells. And I actually heard Mike Francesa on the Bill Simmons podcast, another Bill, talking about the fact that the Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick relationship is very reminiscent of the Bobby Knight, Mike Krzyzewski relationship, in that you have the older mentor, more gregarious with the media, if you say gregarious, but more outspoken, less cerebral, a real motivator, had success but didn't have overwhelming success, but had success wherever they kind of went, but a little bit variability of results. They can burn hot at a place and be out of there quickly, although he was at Indiana forever, but then you have the understudy, the cerebral guy, the one who learns to play within the systems, who finds a way to be in a place for a long time and win for a very long time and dominate the sport for a very long time, to the point where they actually move ahead of the mentor, well ahead, but still stay very respectful for that mentor for what they did. I was watching this documentary. It was great. Watching the old footage with Belichick and Parcells and in the Giants and those initial glory days there in the 80s and 90s, and Belichick going to Cleveland, and then Parcells going to New England, and Belichick coming back there after he was let go from Cleveland. And then just really the thing that stuck out for me was the emotion in Belichick, and this guy you don't see a ton of emotion from, and you see a very gruff personality to the media. There were some moments where he got choked up. One of them was thinking about when he was, there was some footage of him in 2009 walking around maybe the old Giants stadium, and he was walking into a room where he used to work with the other assistant coaches for 12, 15 hours a day. And he was looking in there and he was like, he was tearing up, he was choking up, and he was saying, a lot of good stuff happened in there. And you're like, wow, this guy's choking up over this. This is important to him. And it was amazing seeing the respect he had for Parcells just in this interview. And just how really he looked up to him and never really tried to poke holes in who the guy was. And, it was a kinship that we all hope we have professionally. And the one that really stuck with me, the part, and we all know this part, but just seeing it here was important, was when Parcells stepped aside from being the head coach at the Jets, and Belichick was the head coach in waiting. And it was that point where Belichick just decided, maybe had an under-the-table deal with Robert Kraft in New England, but he just decided that the Jets weren't right for him. And you think about that fact, like when you're in a job yourself as an adult, and you think about how you could stay where you are because you have some semblance of community and it's the right thing to do, and you're really going to have to ruffle feathers to break out of it, to maybe get into the thing that's the much better thing to do that will springboard you into greater successes that you couldn't have even imagined. And you look at Bill Belichick in that moment. he's probably not going to get another chance of being a head coach. And there he is, kind of pulling himself out of it, not feeling that was the exact right thing, even though he was going to be a head coach again of a roster that he kind of molded with Parcells and had the players there in place. And he did the really hard thing, which was to extricate himself from being a head coach and to turn on your mentor and to turn on the comfortable place that was trying to seed the ground for you to do well, and to turn on people who were supporting you in a major way because of the chance of going somewhere where you know you have a clean slate and you could build your program from scratch in the right way that you feel comfortable, to get out of that mentor's shadow or sunlight or however you want to say it. And I think of that moment, and then you look at the results. You look at the fact he extricated himself and the pain and having to go through the league offices and court to decide if he could get himself out of this contract. And how is he going to get himself out of this contract to only go to the division rival up 95? Oh my God. And to turn that around and to find yourself on the precipice of a 6th championship, of 8 Super Bowls. And how many of us would do that? How many of us would push through the comfortable thing, the still great thing, which is being at the apotheosis of your profession, to be a head coach in a major market, and to turn that down on the risk, on the chance, on the hope that the thing you feel better about will work out, and for it to work out like this? That's one of those things. We all run into those decisions, not in that kind of stark contrast like that, not on that kind of stage. But we run into it. We have to push through our comfort. We think of being in a job where somebody has supported us and mentored us, and we have to turn on them and say, I got to go do this. This is what my heart is feeling. This is where I want to go. This is what I need to do. And you might go 5 years without talking to that mentor again, just like Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells did. But you end up coming back to home. You end up coming back to each other. You end up kind of relating on the things you did together for all those years and the great memories, and animus can kind of dissipate away like the low and high tide waves at the ocean. And things will come back, things will go back in, and you got to move your way through, and you got to find your way to the stasis that will be the way you feel comfortable and how you're going to be able to thrive. You have to push through that. And he did, and that was something in that moment that really struck with me. We all know it happened, but seeing it again from that frame of reference, from that point, from this documentary where they're back together and they're having these moments, and that everything does end up working out. You have to have faith in those kind of things when you make a really hard decision to leave those kind of ingrained relationships. The other big thing, tech, I've talked a lot of football here. YouTube TV, the $35 a month over-the-top service from YouTube that gives you live television, has just come out to the Apple TV and Roku. Before, it was on the iPhones and various Google devices, and you could Chromecast it to your Google Chromecast or cast it to your Google Chromecast, but it never had an app on one of these other services. And so that's fine, but it feels weird casting things from or airplaying things from your phone to the TV. You just want a real app on the screen. So they did come out, and I keep toying with the fact of wanting to go to a service like this. I want to go to an over-the-top internet TV service. I'm paying about $70 to $80 a month, as part of my triple play for television, for the cable. And why? Why do I need it? And I fight with the options, and I fight with what am I gaining or what am I losing when I make up money. So while I'm not paying 70 or 80 if I get rid of my cable, if I go to a YouTube TV, I'm paying $35 a month. So you have to determine on a monthly basis, how much is that $35 to $45 that you're gaining back by being on a service like that? How much is that worth it? How much does that balance out against what you're gaining or losing from being on cable? And I often think, like, if I'm not on cable, I'm missing out on the Mets because they're SNY. That digital product hasn't quite come into play yet. I'm missing this thing here or there. But like Yes Network is on YouTube TV. Yes Network's on most of these services. I never have NBA TV. I want that badly. None of these services except DirecTV Now have that. And DirecTV Now, you have to pay the $60 or $70 a month package to get that. So I'm already now even with my cable. And it's hard to undo cable too, because I have babysitters come into the house during the week. I have nannies. Well, no, I don't have nannies. I have one nanny and I have two. I have a mother and a mother-in-law who come and watch our son, and they are reliant on old-fashioned TV. So that's sort of a premium that you got to keep in place because of that. If I move to YouTube TV, are they going to be able to understand how to navigate through an app and to find the channels they're looking for? Probably not. And so there's a cost to that, having to train them and not have them understand, and they don't even know which output or input to go to. It's tough, but I'd love to go to it. Cable's so inefficient, and I never watch it. I'm streaming everything all the time anyway. I'd love to be able to go to an over-the-top service like this. YouTube TV, now being on Apple TV, now being on Roku, it would be a good solution. And it has a lot of good channels. So if you look at one of these, YouTube, what is it? YouTube TV. So I was looking to sign up. It's $35 a month, and I'd have to drop cable, and I'd have to find out at the wrong time that I'm dropping cable. So I go to sign up, and I see myself here. I got to log in. It's funny that it's like to log in to look at YouTube TV, it's like you're logging into Gmail. I let it do my... what happened here unexpectedly? Would like to use your current location. New York area. Okay, let's go. So, you got ABC 7, you got CBS 2, you got Fox, you got Channel 4, you got ESPN, you got Yes, you got FS1, you got USA, FX, ESPN 2, FS2, E, Bravo, Big Ten Network, SEC, ESPN News, CBS Sports Network, FXX, Fox News, tennis, blah, blah, blah. You got all these crazy, AMC. You got all these channels, and I'm already authenticating HBO and Showtime from my parents' TV. So I'm looking at this going, well, what am I really missing out on? What are we watching in our house that's worth $70 or $80 extra dollars? I want to go to the future. This is the future to me. And then it also occurred to me, I'm like, you know what I should do? My parents live in Mahwah, and it was a house that used to be brimming with many members living there. All the kids, there's 4 of us. And so there's many rooms with TVs. And I was like, you know what I should do? I should Sling TV, that Sling setup that you can hook into your cable. And then, as no one's going to use those TVs in those separate rooms where the kids, my siblings used to live, I should Sling TV and then use the Sling app in my home to get what's on their cable. And then I don't pay anything for it. It gets a little cheap feeling, I know. But now I'll get NBA TV. Now I'll get all of these great channels. They have all these packages, because when you got older people in the mix, they end up paying for like every package, and they have like 17 HBOs and 13 Cinemaxes and all this stuff, because they don't realize what they're paying for. They are what the cable companies would consider whales. They're buying everything. They have no discernment over what they're getting or why they're getting it. They just get the full-on packages without realizing it. They got the red zone. They got all this. And I was like, I should do that. But then I'm feeling cheapy because I'm living in this nice, big 3,000 square foot house, and I'm slinging like pirated cable from my parents, even though I know I'd have to buy the Sling TV. But I'm like, man, that's a meaningful amount of money, though. If you gain back $80 a month, what's that, like 900 and... You're almost getting back $1,000 a year. That's not bad. And you're getting more options than you even had here. So I'm fighting it. I'm always working through it. I don't even know what the answer is. I'm just, I don't know. I'm restless. So my restlessness makes me look for answers in other places like cable. But YouTube TV's out. And I think a service like this could do it for me. I'm mostly watching Netflix or Hulu. I'm mostly watching these other services. I could probably drop Hulu if I had this, because I think that YouTube TV has unlimited cloud storage too. So like cloud is sort of like DVR, right? But on a DVR on our cable, it's a hard drive in the cable box. So that's where it saves it. With Google, they're a cloud-based internet company. They can just store all of the shows you want to watch in the cloud. But I don't even know how much I'm watching. I mean, it's hard. I don't watch any live TV, really. I just don't. I watch basketball. I've started watching more of the Nets. They're kind of getting fun to watch. But I don't know. Mostly on demand. That's how I roll. We'll see. I don't know what are you guys doing? I don't know. Do people worry about these things as much as I worry about it? I don't know. I guess I just wish I had more cable options and a better service provider who wasn't so small time. Well, why don't we call it there, folks? Nice little football, long hit, little TV talk. And we'll see how our Super Bowl rolls out tomorrow. Thank you, folks. Have a good night.